ask you to start over again. Could you say your name and then spell any part? I've seen Flint spelled with a Y.
No, only by people who don't know how to spell my name. Kind of an aside, there's few things that aggravate me, and that's one of them, because what happened was people would never get my name right, but they'd never spell it F-L-Y-N-T until Larry Flint came along. And then all of a sudden, Larry Flint with the Y, everybody thought, even people who knew how to spell my name started to misspell my name. And so it's one of those personal pet peeves. You know, if you want to get on the wrong side of me, send me something spelled F-L-Y-N-T. I may correct you, I may not, but it's F-L-I-N-T, Taylor. I'm an attorney at the People's Law Office, and I have been since its inception in 1969, or more correctly, I was a student that was in on founding the People's Law Office back in 1969, and have been a lawyer since 1972. I grew up in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts called Westboro. I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Then I came west to Chicago, to Northwestern University Law School, and I came here the week after the Democratic National Convention in 1968. And I've been here ever since. And as I said earlier, I was affiliated as a young law student with lawyers who started, along with the law students, the People's Law Office in 1969. We started it we took over a little sausage shop, and we converted it into a law office over on Halsted Street, Webster and Halsted, back in the day when that was a very mixed community, a working class community. And we opened an office there in 1969. Our clients were primarily movement people, movement organizations such as the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, the Rising Up Angry, the Young Patriots, and SDS, the various factions of SDS at that time. And that's how we started in 1969. My folks, my father was a college professor. My mother was college educated. She went back to school after she had her family. She worked as a librarian for some period of time. She is still alive. She's now almost 98 years old. The city, of course, abolitionism was if not founded there, was very strong there, and leaders of the abolitionist movement came from Boston and around Boston. Also the literary movement, progressive literary movements in the 1800s and before that. And of course the Boston Massacre, as it's known, but the rebellion in 1770 was led by an African American by the name of Crispus Attucks. On the other hand, there's a very strong racism and segregation that is embedded in the history of Boston, very similar to Chicago. I found that Boston, in many ways, historically, and even during some of the periods of time that I've been fighting against racism, had some of the very similar problems and struggles in terms of racism and segregation as we've had here in Chicago. There's a lot of different things that were born there, and because of course it is where the first people came, the first white people came to this country in 1620, or among the first, the Pilgrims, the most famous, and ironically, my grandmother traced the line on my father's side of the family to the Mayflower. And I had 5 people, for better or for worse, that I am related to who came over on the Mayflower in 1620. I guess I shouldn't be totally proud of that, given what white settlers did to the Native Americans in this country. But that's one line of my family. My mother is Italian, and they came over in the early 1900s as immigrants from Italy. I think the major reason that I became radicalized was the Times and my involvement and my exposure to what was going on in the late 1960s. I was at best a liberal individual in college, and in my later years in college. The reason that I became radicalized was the times and my involvement in my exposure to what was going on in the late 1960s. Was the times and my involvement my exposure to what was going on in the late 1960s. I was at best a liberal individual in college, and in my later years in college I became exposed to the Vietnam War and the fight against the imperialism of the Vietnam War. But when I came to Chicago, that's when, through another law student who interested me and took me literally to work with lawyers who ultimately became the People's Law Office. And through that I became exposed to the realities not only of repression and racism, but I also was introduced to remarkable persons who were involved in these movements, from Bernardine Dorn to Fred Hampton to Mike James to others who were at the forefront of the various movements that were taking Chicago by storm, more or less, in the late 60s. And that had a very profound impact on my political development and my social justice development. And if you want to point to one event that had the most impact not only on myself but on the office here, the People's Law Office, and the founding of it and the forging of it as the kind of vehicle that it has continued to be over the last 40 to 45 years, that of course was the murder or assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, the Black Panther leaders, on December 4th, 1969. At that time, we had just founded the office, the People's Law Office. That was in August of that year. And the name the People's Law Office came from the movement. We represented the Panthers, and the Panthers had a People's Medical Clinic. They had people's, it was all power to the people was their favorite saying. And so we kind of naturally became known as the People's Lawyers and the People's Clark. But personally, and I think most everyone, lawyers or law students, as I was in December 4th of 1969, who were affiliated with the People's Law Office, will tell you that the murder of Fred Hampton, and not only the viciousness of it and the fact that we knew him, that we respected him, that we represented him, but in fact when we went to the apartment that morning where he was slain and Mark Clark was murdered, the police had left it open. So we had a lawyer by the name of Skip Andrew who had the presence of mind to organize all of us into a team that took evidence at that apartment for 10 days. And at that point, we were in fear, literal fear that the police might come back and take us.
So you were there during the day?
We were there day, and then we would leave at night. And during each day, we would document. We'd pick up all the bullet shells that were left. We had a photographer. We had a videographer, a man named Mike Gray, who went on to make The Murder of Fred Hampton a very important film, and also went on to make some popular Hollywood movies, including The China Syndrome. But we went there and we did all of that, and in some ways it was like a reenactment of, and it certainly wasn't on this scale, but it seemed like sort of like the Underground Railroad, because we would take the evidence, we would document it, we would put it in envelopes, and then we would go at night and take that evidence to a safe house, or what we really would do was we'd be told, go to a church on such and such a corner. And we go to that church, and the minister would greet us at the door, and he would take us upstairs to the attic, and we would bring the evidence up into the attic. And then we'd leave. And we'd do it under security so that if the police were following us, they wouldn't know where we were taking the evidence. It was on that level of fear and that we were operating, but we were successful in documenting the fact that it was a shoot-in, that it was not a shootout like the state's attorney who was in charge of the raid, Edward Hanrahan, and the police, the elite police force that did it, had told the media and made the Panthers into these vicious people, Fred Hampton and all, who they said had initiated and engaged in a shootout with these brave police. There were 2 or 3 churches in the city with ministers who were very progressive, who we had relationships with. And that's who we were sent, those churches were where we were sent to bring the evidence. Now there was a door, a very famous door, that was at the front of the apartment. And when we went there, there were 2 bullet holes in it. And the police were claiming that there was only 1 bullet hole in it and that the shot came out, and this proved that the Panthers fired the first shot. Well, we carefully took that door panel out of the door and we filmed it to show that it was coming out of the door and what it looked like that morning when we first got there, so that nobody could say that we in any way monkeyed with the door. We then took the door and we took it to one of these churches. And then later on, over Christmas break, for me and the other law student who got me initiated into the office, we were both from back east. So we drove that door all the way across country. My mother remembers to this day, 97, 98 years old, she remembers that I brought that door to the house before we took it to a lab in upstate New York, to a ballistics expert who was independent in order to test it, to show that one of those bullet holes came from the police going in. So that was another little cloak and dagger situation that we were involved in. But the reality was it was an incredibly sobering and politicizing event.
How old were you? I
was second-year law student. It was 1969. I was 23 years old at that time. And all of us were young. Dennis was like the granddaddy of our office. He was 10 years older than I was, so that made him 33. But the lawyers, other than Dennis, were all 2 or 3 years older than I was, 26, 27, only a few years out of law school. And so we saw, when we went there, the first thing we really saw was a pool of blood near this mattress in the back bedroom, and that was the pool of blood where Fred Hampton died, and because he was on that bed, and they killed him in his bed, and there was blood on the bed, and then they dragged him off of the bed into this front area right in front of the bedroom door. And what we also saw was the bullet holes, almost like Swiss cheese, in this small apartment. Probably could fit most of the apartment into this room here. It was a very small, what was then known as kind of a ghetto apartment, with just plaster board divisions between these 2 or 3 bedrooms, and they came in with a machine gun and they laced the walls with the Panthers in those bedrooms. And you could
machine gun? I didn't recall hearing that.
Yeah,
there was a
machine gun. Joe Gorman had a machine gun, and he stitched the wall, and you could see all of the bullets, the holes, and you could line them up with dowels to show where each bullet went. And that was another way we showed it wasn't a shootout. We were able to show that all the bullets went in, and none of them came out in any manner other than perhaps that one in the door that would have shown any shots fired by the Panthers. So all of that at the same time that this was one of the most remarkable events media-wise in the history of the city. It was on the front page. There were 4 newspapers then, 2 mornings and 2 afternoons. And all 4 of them had this on the front page for literally a month. And there was a newspaper war that was created. The Tribune papers were very pro Hanrahan and the police and put their version out. And after we convinced the Marshall Fields, the Fields papers, that being the Sun-Times and the Daily News at that time, that in fact it was, and that took some convincing and showing the editor of the Sun-Times in a nighttime visit that he made, the realities of where the bullets went and the blood, they became much more fair and open about how they approached it, and they put the Panthers stories out, and they pointed out that the bullets that Hanrahan pointed to say, here's where the Panthers shot. Well, we showed the Sun-Times that they were nail heads, not bullet holes. What happened was, initially all 4 papers totally bought the police story and blared on the front pages with pictures and headlines, and the Panther shootout, you know, Hampton killed and shootout, and just put just in, you know, in hike verba or in verse what the police said happened. There was a young reporter, his name's Bryan Boyer. He wrote for the Sun-Times. Bryan Boyer came to the apartment early, maybe that day, maybe the next morning, and he looked, and we showed him what really went on. He wrote what was the first article that challenged the police version of the events and said the physical evidence doesn't match up with what they're saying. He wrote it, and the editors of the Sun-Times put it on page 43 next to the obituaries, you know, continuing in the main with stories that supported the police. Boyer quit. He quit the Sun-Times that night. This caused the editor of the Sun-Times, who at that time was a guy named Jim Hogue. Jim Hogue has now gone on, I think his latest job, he went into Washington, but now I think he's the head of Human Rights Watch. But in any event, at that time, he came to the apartment, it was probably 8 or 9 at night, with his wife or fiance or girlfriend, I don't know who it was, I was there. Dressed to the nines, they came from the opera. His fiance had on a fur, and they're coming into this blood-soaked ghetto apartment, and you know, just totally destroyed apartment. And they come and we show them through. And after they came, after that, that's when the Sun-Times and the Daily News, which was the afternoon paper, the field paper, changed their policy. And that's when they started to run stories that showed the reality of what had happened. December, which would have been almost 2 weeks. And the Panthers had the presence of mind to conduct tours of the apartment and show the bullet, riddled walls, to show the bloody mattress, and to describe what Panther's version and really what was the truth of the matter was to literally hundreds and thousands of people. Off the west side, come from the south side, and also, concerned white people were coming from the suburbs and going on these tours. One day, an older African-American woman was going through the apartment while I was there. And she looked around and she shook her head and she said, what was the truth of the matter was to literally hundreds and thousands of people. Off the west side, come from the south side, and also, concerned white people were coming from the suburbs and going on these tours. One day, an older African-American woman was going through the apartment while I was there. And she looked around and she shook her head and she said, ain't nothing but a northern lynching. And that stuck with me to this day. And I always recount that because it seemed to me it was such a poignant and direct summary of what had happened. Assassination, the fact that we went to that apartment, other ones of us, other lawyers went to the jail and interviewed the surviving Panthers, the ones who weren't killed and who weren't taken to the hospital, several were taken to the hospital, but several, including Fred Hampton's girlfriend, Deborah Johnson, who wasn't physically injured. She was pregnant. She was 8.5 months pregnant at that time. Jeff Haas went and talked to her, so he found out right from the beginning what had happened and how they had in fact assassinated Fred. And she told the story about how he was asleep next to her, how the bullets started raining in and vibrating the mattress, that Fred didn't wake up, but he didn't appear to be shot, and they took her out of the room. They mean the police. And there was like a lull in the shooting. And they took out the surviving Panthers and brought them in, to one of the main rooms. And then she heard a police officer say, "He's barely alive. He'll barely make it," or something like this. And then she heard 2 more shots. And that we always felt, and the ballistics evidence confirmed, that was when they finished off Fred Hampton, put a bullet in his head. So that combined with what we saw there was just something that we could never turn back from, and we didn't. First they arrested all the Panthers, and we represented them, several of them, along with a set of lawyers, of very tremendous criminal defense lawyers in the city, mostly African-American defense lawyers. When that case was thrown out because the ballistics evidence showed the FBI disproved all of the contentions that there was a shootout, and showed ballistically what we saw visually, which was that it was a shoot-in. Case against the Panthers was thrown out, so then we brought this civil rights suit, and we fought that case for 13 years. And during that 13 years, Jeff Haas and myself, Dennis Cunningham, and other lawyers in the office fought that case, and during the case, and it was a civil rights case, it was a damages case, we were able to uncover evidence that showed that not only was this a murder, the assassination, not only was the police and state's attorney involved, but that behind it all was the FBI. So we were able to show not only that the police and the state's attorney's office was behind this murderous raid, but that the FBI and its COINTELPRO program was behind it. And back during that period of time, history has shown, and documents from the FBI now establish without a doubt, that they had a program called the Counterintelligence or COINTELPRO program. And this program was designed to disrupt and ultimately to destroy radical and revolutionary organizations. And that in the 60s and in the late 60s, it was focused primarily first on Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and various other radical and revolutionary organizations. Malcolm X, and various other radical and revolutionary organizations. And then when the Panthers came to prominence in the mid to late 60s, it focused on the Black Panthers with a vengeance. And that this COINTELPRO program focused on destroying and disrupting the Panthers here in Chicago, among other places, and that one of its main targets was Fred Hampton. And that when, in fact, they decided to raid the apartment that Fred Hampton was living in, they utilized an FBI informant provocateur by the name of William ONeal. And he had risen to prominence, some prominence in the party, in the Black Panther Party, as a director of security, ironically. He got information that included drawing a floor plan of the apartment where Hampton was living, and drew out in great detail the bedrooms where each of the Panthers would be in. And he supplied that floor plan to the FBI and its counterintelligence operative. William ONeal was the informant. He supplied it to the COINTELPRO operative here in Chicago, a man by the name of Roy Mitchell. And Mitchell then took this information and enticed or convinced or conspired with the police locally and the state's attorney locally at Hanrahan to conceive of this raid. But it was a crucial piece of the raid's planning to have that floor plan and to have all the inside information that ONeal was giving the FBI. And so when the raid took place, it was designed to kill and maim rather than to just arrest, because they considered and then rejected the idea of going at 8 o'clock in the evening when basically they could have gotten the guns that were being kept there, but they wouldn't have had the element of surprise that they wanted.
I heard that there were no illegal guns there.
There were, that's true. That's true. The Panthers' ideology, and they backed it up, was self-defense. So they had guns there. They had, but they were legally purchased guns. In any event, later we uncovered documentation that not only about ONeal and the floor plan, but that the FBI claimed the raid as part of its COINTELPRO program, and that after the murderous raid was completed, that J. Edgar Hoover and his assistants in Washington approved a bonus for ONeal for the, quote, success of the raid. And ONeal was given this bonus by the highest levels of the FBI for making the raid a success. And then they covered it up. They covered up the FBI's role in it for many years until we uncovered it. So this 13-year struggle went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and ultimately we were able to obtain a monetary settlement for the survivors of the raid and the family of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. It went on. What happened was we had an 18-month trial. We had this incredibly racist Alabama transplanted judge who fought us tooth and nail, and then after 18 months threw the case out and wouldn't let the jury decide it. And then we had to appeal it, but we won it on appeal to the Federal Appeals Court. And then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court because the federal government and Hanrahan and the police took it to the Supreme Court, asking it to reverse the Appeals Court. And the Supreme Court refused to do that. So yes, it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
So it wasn't like anybody was awarded money. There was the police or the government says, hey, we take this money and leave us alone.
After 13 years of fighting, yes. They settled. That happens still in a lot of cases. You reach a settlement rather than to go back to trial. We had the one trial. That had taken 18 months. At that time, it was the longest trial in federal court history. Jeff Haas and I were two main lawyers who tried the case. We both were held in contempt by this racist judge from time to time. We both spent time in jail during the trial. With regard to the judge, Judge Perry, so he brought all of that to the trial, and he was bound and determined that no matter what a jury might say, he was not going to let it stand. And so we went through this 18-month trial, and then at the end of it, the jury went out to deliberate. And instead of letting the jury bring back a verdict, he intervened and granted the defense motion to end the case. And that's why the jury didn't get to decide it. And, but that was just the end of a long, incredible 18-month trial, during which we were able to uncover the fact that the FBI had suppressed 200 volumes of FBI documents that were related to Hampton and the Panthers, that they were under order to produce. So the judge did his level best to excuse the FBI for that blatant misconduct. But ultimately, that was something that the appeals court found was a violation of basic trial practice and ethics, and that was one of the reasons that the appeals court reversed the case.